Get some!
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and we have, as usual, a gigantic show ahead for you. In the second hour, John Idarola will be joining me to talk about the fantastic artwork that you can experience while looking at Donald Trump's latest round of NFTs, which unfortunately for all of you have already sold out, so apologies. But we do have some more, shall we say, substantive topics to get to in the first hour. I'll be doing a deep dive on nuclear energy with the news peg on the fact that Germany has decided to shut down its last remaining nuclear reactors. Was it a good decision, a bad decision? You can decide for yourselves, but I'll give you the facts. Later, we'll also talk about something that the right wing has been celebrating because they think it's an example of me not being in favor of doing something in response to the climate emergency. And really, it's the rant that I engaged in recently in regard to the cost associated with transitioning to electric vehicles. Turns out I'm not the only one who's concerned about the financial burdens that ordinary Americans are going to be facing. So we'll talk about that in a detailed and nuanced way. And we will, of course, lighten things up quite a bit in the bonus episode for our members. So one man decided it would be a great idea to propose to his now fiance by kidnapping her. Was it romantic? Could it possibly be romantic? I don't know, you gotta be a member to find out. tyt.com/join to become one. You can also help support the show by liking and sharing the stream if you're watching us live online. With that said, can't wait to share this next story with you. I have waited quite a while to make sure I had a firm grasp on this topic before bringing it up for discussion here at TYT. So let's talk about nuclear. Germany has decided to go forward with its plans to shut down their last remaining nuclear reactors. The controversial decision comes with some serious climate-related consequences that are worth discussing. Now, fierce debates over whether countries should completely phase out nuclear power have raged on for decades. What ends up complicating the matter even more is how to do away with nuclear, which is a clean energy source, while adequately addressing our energy needs. Can countries make that transition without depending on destructive fossil fuels to fill the gap? Unfortunately, so far, the answer is no. Before we explore Germany and the issues surrounding nuclear bans, it's important to understand why there's been an effort to ban nuclear power in the first place. The anti-nuclear movement understandably took off during the Cold War in the 1970s, when sincere fears of nuclear war and mutually assured destruction took hold. Protesters had legitimate fears that stockpiles of atomic weapons would eventually destroy us all. Let's take a look.
The first protests were small and local, but the movement spread quickly in the 70s, leading to month-long sit-ins and riots in the following years. And then came the Chernobyl catastrophe. Its radioactive fallout also reached Germany, which further cemented the anti-nuclear sentiment in the public. That led to a unique landmark decision. In 2002, Germany decided to phase out nuclear energy. At that point, 19 reactors were generating over a quarter of Germany's electricity, but they were shut down one by one. And the 2011 nuclear accident in Fukushima sped things up.
In Fukushima haben wir zur Kenntnis nehmen müssen, dass selbst in einem Hochtechnologieland wie Japan die Risiken der Kernenergie nicht sicher beherrscht werden können.
The week of the catastrophe, all older plants were shut down. A few months later, the government decided to get out of nuclear power once and for all by the end of 2022.
Well, Germany more or less kept its promise and recently completed its nuclear phase out by shutting down the last 3 remaining reactors. Unfortunately, what doesn't get discussed enough is what nuclear energy ends up getting replaced with. In Germany's case, it ended up being one of the dirtiest fossil fuels available.
People are being urged to cut their energy use,
which put Germany in a very tight spot. The threat of a gas shortage loomed. 3 of the remaining 6 nuclear power plants had just been turned off. The country had to resort to firing up old coal plants to make up for it, which pushed up overall emissions.
Pushing up overall emissions, not good, very bad. Left without nuclear energy and limited natural gas due to, of course, Russia's war with Ukraine, Germany had no choice but to turn to coal. And to be clear, methane-emitting fossil fuels like natural gas aren't exactly an ideal replacement for nuclear either. For the environmentalists out there, don't be too hard on Germany. They're actually not alone in turning to climate warming energy sources in lieu of nuclear power. As in California, New York, Italy, Taiwan, and virtually everywhere else that abandons nuclear energy, fossil fuels have largely made up the difference, which is a disaster. Aside from destroying the planet and contributing to the climate emergency, the fossil fuels that now replace nuclear also have an immediate impact on people's health. Coal and gas laces the air with fine particles that lodge in the lungs and trigger all kinds of diseases. Massachusetts Institute of Technology researchers concluded that deactivating reactors leads to thousands of premature deaths from the air pollution, particularly in poor and marginalized populations. And despite investing heavily in hydroelectricity, biomass, wind and solar, these sources of energy simply don't generate enough power to fill the gap left behind by nuclear's phase out.
Germany just isn't there yet. 1/3 of its electricity still comes from dirty coal. And that's why nuclear energy could be useful. To replace coal until renewable energies ramp up enough, batteries are developed enough, and transmission grids are built widely enough to even out the regional differences in wind and solar generation.
As Alexander Kaufman writes in HuffPost, for all the billions of euros Germany spent on renewables, the now 6 reactors shut down since the end of 2021 produced more zero carbon electricity than all the country's solar panels combined, and did so without requiring gas and coal-fired plants to switch on when the sky went dark. And look, the picture is even more bleak when you take a step back and look at Europe as a whole. Even with some of the technological improvements, like batteries, for instance, that store solar energy that can be used when the sky is dark, the current capabilities are still nowhere close to meeting Europe's energy needs. Weaker than anticipated winds the previous summer had actually forced utilities in wind-powered nations to burn through more gas than expected. And the methane gas that had served as backup for renewables, meanwhile, relied on a fresh supply constantly flowing through the continent's network of pipelines. And we all know how we feel about pipelines. Now, the point here is not to trash the incredible strides that Germany has made in the realm of renewables. As an American, I find it enviable that Germany, treats transitioning to renewables with the seriousness that the United States lacks. In fact, by 2022, around 50% of Germany's energy actually came from renewables, which is pretty damn impressive. And the country's goal is to increase their reliance on renewables to a whopping 80% by 2030. But there are huge questions about how Germany will fulfill the other 20% of its energy needs. And that's assuming the country reaches its 80% renewable energy goal by the year 2030.
And what do we do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? The amount of electricity needed to compensate for that is called the residual load, and it fluctuates a lot during the day. To fill the gap, we would either need huge batteries to store the energy in peak times, which we are still far from having on a large enough scale, or we need power plants that we can shut on and off very flexibly. Right now, a lot of this flexible adjusting in Germany is done by gas plants, which can be turned on and off completely within just 30 minutes. But they, of course, also emit considerable emissions. To cut those, we need to have a low-carbon energy source. Hydro and biomass are currently not flexible enough for that in Germany. So could nuclear power fill that gap?
And again, this is the 20% gap that Germany would be dealing with, assuming they get to 80% renewables by the year 2030. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's actually take a look at what's happening in other countries right now before finally considering the costs and benefits of each model. Now, France actually resisted calls to end its dependency on nuclear power. The country happens to rely pretty heavily on it. Just a few weeks ago, on April 7th, the carbon intensity of Germany's power grid was roughly 10 times that of France's. Just let that sink in for a second. Then there are other countries that actually banned nuclear energy long before Germany did. Denmark is a prime example, having outlawed nuclear power in 1985. Today, about half of the country's energy comes from wind and solar, which, by the way, just pause for 1 second, makes me really realize how far behind the United States is on renewables. But I continue. It sounds impressive until you realize that Denmark does rely on fossil fuels and burning wood to fill the gap left behind by phasing out nuclear power. Without nuclear, Denmark needs fossil fuels and wood to provide energy for heating their homes, keeping the lights on at businesses, and also for fueling transportation. Pretty rough if you're concerned about the climate emergency, which of course, I'm definitely concerned about that. A lot of people are concerned about that. On top of that, Denmark simply is not generating nearly as much power as they would if they kept a few nuclear reactors without decommissioning them. Now, the British energy think tank Ember claims that last year, wind and solar generated a little under 21 terawatt hours of electricity. Germany's 3 remaining nuclear reactors alone, before they were shut down, managed to double that in the same year. Now, right before Germany actually went through with decommissioning its nuclear reactors, Danish protesters like 25-year-old Johan Solid traveled from Denmark to Berlin to speak out against the potential shutdowns. He told the press this, quote, "These 3 nuclear reactors in Germany produce more electricity than all Danish windmills and solar panels combined. In one day, they wipe out the whole energy transition of Denmark." But what are the experts saying? I mean, it's one thing to hear from a 25-year-old protester from Denmark who doesn't like what his country did, but I want to hear from actual experts, environmentalists, including those who are a little more skeptical toward nuclear energy. Now, we trust the terrifying reports from the IPCC, for instance, which indicate the rapid pace at which our climate is warming. Do they agree with the nuclear phase out? Let's watch.
On the point of emissions, there is agreement. The International Energy Agency sees nuclear power as necessary to lower our emissions as fast as possible. And the IPCC also factors in a growth in nuclear power in most of its 1.5-degree scenarios.
Even environmentalist Greta Thunberg, who is famously against nuclear power, says, when it came to Germany mothballing nuclear reactors to transition back to coal, not in favor of it. She just expressed quite a bit of dismay. In fact, Thunberg even got arrested while protesting the expansion of coal in Germany. While some countries like Germany have banned nuclear energy, other countries have decided to go in the opposite direction, and that includes Japan, which was the site of the Fukushima nuclear disaster that was brought on by a tsunami back in 2011. The tsunami flooded backup generators at the laxly regulated power plant, which triggered the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. But notably, no one died from the radiation. Things began to shift toward the end of 2021 as warming, meaning climate warming, worsened. The COVID-19 pandemic deprioritized emissions cuts, and the trade-offs associated with depending entirely on renewables became clearer. Ahead of the United Nations Climate Summit that November, Japan pledged to restart its reactors. So other countries have also decided to not only protect the nuclear power they have in their countries, but to develop more nuclear power. Ghana and Indonesia announced plans to build their first nuclear plants. China also promised to build 150 reactors in the next 15 years, more than the entire world constructed in the last 35 years. Poland recently announced plans to go on a reactor building spree, according to HuffPost. Poland announced a deal late last year to build its first full-scale nuclear power plant using American reactor technology and hired South Korea's nuclear exporter to construct its second station shortly afterward. And believe it or not, like this actually shocked me, but even Ukraine has placed orders for new reactors that have been designed in the United States, betting that atomic energy is actually safer than gas or oil. And that's after Russia occupied the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. But nuclear, I want to be clear about this, does come with downsides, which includes issues with nuclear waste disposal, and also, of course, potential accidents at reactor sites.
The discourse in Germany has centered on the question of safety. Talking about accidents and looking at the numbers alone, though, nuclear is much safer than coal and other fossil fuels. Check out this graph. Not only are fossil fuels way worse for climate change, but air pollution and mining accidents have claimed far more lives than nuclear accidents. Nuclear waste storage is another contentious issue.
There is the solution, which has been agreed widely by the scientific committee, which is burial in deep geological repositories. And the first one is, in fact, going to be coming into operation in Finland.
The site in Finland is the only one in the world in construction. Sweden just licensed a site of its own. But the other 30+ countries with nuclear power have yet to build or license sites. And the search for suitable areas is long, fraught, and controversial. The fear of contamination has continually sparked protests.
Look, there could come a day where we have the technological advancements necessary to abandon nuclear entirely without having to turn to coal or wood or natural gas or some other fossil fuel. But the point is, we're not there yet. So as with other political issues, countries seem to be putting the cart before the horse, which drives me crazy. And in this case, it's causing destruction to the environment, to the planet. Healthcare, and the healthcare costs associated with turning to more fossil fuels in lieu of nuclear is another concern that I personally have. Look, this isn't to say I love nuclear energy and I want to keep it for eternity. I understand the risks associated with it. I understand the impact it has because of the use of fresh water for these nuclear reactors. There could be some technological advancements that mitigate those issues as well. But my whole point in bringing up this issue is that it just doesn't make sense to phase out one of the most dependable clean energy sources before we've developed the necessary renewable energy to basically close the gap left behind by the phase out of nuclear. That's the point I'm trying to make. And weirdly enough, somehow people have convinced themselves that switching over to burning wood or switching over to coal is somehow better than continuing to rely on nuclear energy until we develop more renewable energy that we can rely on and to close the gap. But it's an interesting topic, one that for some reason fires people up. At the end of the day, it's nuanced. You have to do a cost-benefit analysis, and you have to weigh the risks of nuclear with the risks of using climate, warming fossil fuels. And based on the data that we have right now, I think that Germany probably should have kept those 3 nuclear reactors up and running until they reached better developments when it came to renewable energy. Anyway, a lot of you have thoughts about this. I will read your comments in our first social break. For now, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about how the Biden administration might get some blowback over its weak efforts, to say the least, in helping ordinary Americans afford the transition to electric vehicles. That and more coming up. Don't miss it. everyone. Welcome back to our social break. I'm gonna start with a critical comment, which I knew I would get, from Melanie44. This is in our Twitch subs. Nuclear waste is very poisonous and needs to use water to keep the plant cool. Fresh drinking water, we're in a drought. I hear you. I mean, there's definitely issues with nuclear power as well. But the same could be said about electric vehicles. Their batteries are not good for the environment. They're just not. And so we're making that transition anyway, because the idea is that this, after doing a cost benefit analysis, electric vehicles are far better for the planet than sticking to gas fueled vehicles. In this case with nuclear waste, I totally hear you. I mentioned it in the piece, but we either deal with that nuclear waste or we deal with the carbon emissions that are rapidly warming our planet, causing all sorts of extreme weather events, leading to all sorts of death and destruction, especially in poor and disenfranchised communities. It is a difficult and nuanced issue. I don't think anyone has all the answers, but I do think that for the time being, just based on the data that I've personally seen and weighing the different costs of different methods of producing energy, keeping nuclear is probably the best option, but I don't want to minimize some of the risks associated with that. So I totally hear you. Octo Squiddy says, nuclear is just the left's excuse to come in and take your gas stove. Stay woke, brother Kappa. I don't think this has anything to do with gas stoves, but I like your comment. Let's go to our TYT members. We've got Eclectic Miscellanea who says, I'm excited for Anna's solo hour with one of her legendary deep dives. Maybe that should be the name of the new segment, Deep Dives with Anna Kasparian. Maybe. We've got Trauma Queen. Nuclear power is the last power production that should go. All right, so you're more in line with what I'm thinking when it comes to nuclear energy. Jerry writes in and says, I don't know if this will be covered in today's show, but big shout out to more than 100,000 federal workers going on national general strike in Canada today. Worker solidarity, that is not in the show today, but thank you for mentioning it. We've got Gabby Marita who says, Spain has had a moratorium on nuclear power plants since 1983. Instead, wind and solar have been steadily developed to the point that as of today, my home region generates 103.3% of its electricity from renewable sources. The surplus is exported. That is incredible. I love hearing that. Chaz writes in and says, what about geothermal energy? What about it? I don't have a comment on it. I don't want to comment on something that I don't know too much about yet, but I am fascinated by this topic. I am reading and researching about it more and more. So I might do a segment on geothermal later on a later show. All right, we got to get back to the show. I'll see you guys there. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Anna Kasparian, and we're gonna keep this climate-related first hour going because I wanted to talk a little bit about what Axios has referred to as Biden's green gamble. What exactly is that? Biden's EPA has announced some pretty far-reaching climate rules that are meant to dramatically change the way Americans travel and commute over the next decade. Which sounds like a great idea if you're concerned about the climate emergency, which is very real, and we absolutely should respond to it appropriately. For instance, the EPA under Biden's administration want 2/3 of all passenger cars sold in the United States to be electric by the year 2032. What a lofty goal. Now, we're a long way from that. Less than 6% of new cars sold last year happened to be electric vehicles. And there are some cost concerns, especially since the financial burden would be placed squarely on the ordinary American consumer in the middle of a rigged economy that they're already struggling with. And I have huge issues with that. As Axios reports, if Biden's plan goes through, consumers in 9 years would find fewer gasoline options and be compelled compelled, meaning forced, to buy vehicles that currently are more expensive and have less driving range than traditional cars. Now look, I have issues with the driving range associated with electric vehicles as well, but let's put that aside. You can deal with that. What about the financial burden? I have no issue with transitioning to vehicles that are better for the environment. I have no problem making changes that are better for our planet. I do have a problem though with the government forcing you to do something and not providing the adequate financial assistance to make it possible. And that is the issue that I'm starting to run into more and more with the Democratic Party. So electric cars currently are dependent on Chinese manufacturers. I bring that up for good reason, because since a lot of this technology is dependent on Chinese manufacturers and tech companies for parts and batteries, the financial assistance that has been offered up by the Democratic Party is actually not that great, because it is reliant on you purchasing vehicles that are manufactured in the United States with American parts. And by the way, there also aren't enough charging stations or the infrastructure necessary to support the electric vehicles. So other infrastructural issues were highlighted by the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, as California was dealing with a pretty crippling heat wave last summer. Now, that heat wave placed a heavy burden on the state's energy grid. And here is exactly what Gavin Newsom said to Californians just a few weeks after Gavin Newsom said that he was going to push through a transition to electric vehicles. Let's watch.
A heat wave is descending on California, prompting state officials to ask electric vehicle owners to refrain from charging their cars in hopes of avoiding power outages. But putting out this call just a week after unveiling plans to ban the sale of new gas-powered vehicles by the year 2035.
Residents are being asked to conserve energy, and that includes not charging their cars from 4 to 9 p.m., a time where demand is high, but resources from solar power is low. The irony is that California is at the forefront of the push for electric vehicles. A week ago, the state passed a bill requiring 35% of new vehicles to produce zero emissions by 2026, increasing to 68% by 2030, and then 100% by 2035.
2035 is not that far away. So the idea that we're going to basically phase out the sale of gas-powered vehicles entirely and just rely on electric vehicles that would place a heavy burden on our electric grid, it's just all insane. Does anyone genuinely think that California is gonna upgrade its electric grid to the point that it can actually accommodate all of these electric vehicles, especially during a heat wave when there's a heavy burden on the electric grid? This is what politicians do. They say whatever they think will appeal to you. They'll even push through policies that they think will appeal to you. They'll pander like crazy, but they don't actually think through the costs associated, the infrastructure necessary. It's infuriating. Now I get it, some of the Biden stands out there, some of the Democrat stands out there might respond to this by saying, well, you know, Biden and the Democrats passed 2 bills that appropriate some funding for these issues. Did they? Okay, let's get to that actually. So for instance, there was the Inflation Reduction Act, which didn't deal with inflation at all, but that's beside the point. And then there was, of course, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And to be fair, those 2 bills did appropriate some funding for climate-related issues. But what does that mean? Well, spending $5 billion for 500,000 highway chargers and $2.5 billion for community chargers. Okay, so there's some money there, $5 billion for the charging stations. Setting price limits and income restrictions on EV tax credits to steer benefits toward mass market buyers. That was a euphemism for they're going to like means test the financial assistance that's gonna be offered up to people so they make this super costly transition to electric vehicles. Okay, the means testing frustrates me because we know how means testing works, okay? They will have the threshold be so incredibly low that a lot of people aren't gonna qualify even as they're being compelled to buy electric vehicles. With that said, there's more I wanna get to here that's incredibly frustrating. Remember, I was talking a little bit about the manufacturing of these cars and the financial assistance only applying to electric vehicles that are made in the United States with American parts. It's gonna be an issue, okay? Now, other areas of financial assistance in the two bills that I mentioned included tax credits for used EV buyers, lucrative tax credits for companies, this is important, for companies that build electric vehicles and batteries in the United States, which could trickle down to consumers. Trickle down to consumers. Where have I heard trickle down before? And why do I have such a bad reaction to that phrase? It's like a repellent. It disgusts me because nothing ever trickles down to ordinary consumers, okay? Tax credits for companies means tax credits increase their profits through our money. That's what tax credits mean. But let's talk a little bit about some of the financial assistance to ordinary Americans, because ordinary Americans under these bills would also get a little bit of financial assistance directly in the form of tax credits, of course. New Biden administration rules first announced March 31st will sharply winnow the number of vehicles now eligible for the $7,500 tax credit. Okay, so the tax credit alone is not enough, especially when you look at the costs of electric vehicles, okay? But a lot of the electric vehicles available on the market today absolutely would not qualify for the full $7,500 tax credit. So let's get to some of the specifics here. If you look at this graph, it actually lists which cars are getting electric vehicle tax breaks. It's really important for you to, of course, see the amount of the tax credit, which is $7,500 in some cases. It goes down to $3,750 if the vehicle has parts that were manufactured in other countries like China. But if you notice an asterisk next to any of the vehicles on this list, it's because the vehicles aren't even on the market yet. But the plug-in hybrid by Lincoln, for instance, the lowest MSRP for that car is $70,190. And if you're lucky, you'll get a $7,500 tax credit if you buy that car. I mean, come on. The next one is a Jeep Grand Cherokee, which doesn't qualify for the full tax credit, but costs $60,360. You've got the full electric Ford F-150, which a family member of mine just bought, and it's very nice, but it's also very expensive, nearly $60,000. I mean, the list goes on and on. And under the new Treasury list, 7 models will be eligible for the full $7,500 tax credit, and 6 will qualify for $3,750, which is half of the tax credit, depending on whether they're battery minerals, their battery components, or both meet the domestic content rules. And again, anything with an asterisk that you saw on that list indicates cars that aren't even on the market yet. So the Blazer EV from Chevy, not on the market yet. Equinox EV, one of the cheaper cars at just $30,000, not on the market yet. You get the point. I mean, if you want a Chevy Bolt, lowest MSRP for that is $26,500. That qualifies for the full $7,500 tax credit. But also, if the tax credit only applies to vehicles that are manufactured in the United States with parts and minerals from the United States, doesn't that decrease competition with other electric vehicle producers? Couldn't the American-made manufacturers jack up their prices even more if you wanna, take advantage of that tax credit, which again, I don't think is enough. Look, maybe I'm going on and on here, maybe I'm blabbering too much, but do you guys get the point here? My point is not that I'm against transitioning to electric vehicles. My issue is that in case after case, climate policy after climate policy, ordinary Americans are told to do things, and if they can't afford it, they're told to kick rocks. And I'm sick of it. I really am. Okay, we've got a broken healthcare system, unaffordable housing, a rigged economic system that redistributes wealth from the bottom to the top. And then on top of that, we get to hear from our local and federal lawmakers that we are compelled to move to electric vehicles with little help, little financial help. I have a problem with that. For anyone on the left who thinks that being critical of this issue makes me right wing, please, for the love of God, read a book, go outside, touch grass. Okay, you have a very simplistic mind and you don't know how to think in a nuanced way. If you think it's okay to force ordinary Americans who are already struggling to make these transitions with little financial help from our federal government, which by the way has no problem shelling out hundreds of billions of dollars every year for the Defense Department, I don't know. I just feel like you're not really thinking this through. And you're also not thinking through how deeply unpopular it is to be part of a political movement that on one hand rightly takes climate change seriously, but on the other hand has this incredibly callous approach of asking everyone in the country, whether they're struggling financially or not, to take on the burdens and to stop complaining about it. And all the fossil fuel companies that privatize the gains and socialize the losses, where are they at? How about an extra tax on them to help fund increased tax credits for Americans who are looking to buy electric vehicles? But there's no conversation about that because God forbid, we hold the very fossil fuel companies that created the climate emergency in the first place accountable for their actions. God forbid we cut into their profits just a little bit. So yeah, I'm a little heated about this, super heated about this, because this ain't enough help. This is a massive financial burden for ordinary Americans. And anyone who thinks otherwise is in for a day of reckoning at some point when we have elections. I don't know if it's gonna be the next election cycle. I don't know if it's gonna be election cycle after that. But if Democrats think that they can push these policies on ordinary people without providing adequate financial aid, they'd be mistaken. It is going to hurt them. Now, just 2 EVs now on the market will be available for less than $25,000 after the tax credit is deducted. The Chevy Bolt, whose cost could fall to $19,000, just $19,000, guys, thanks to the tax break. And a utility vehicle version of the Bolt, which could drop to $20,300. That's assuming buyers can actually find the vehicles at that price in today's post-pandemic seller's market. And look, I get that we are drowning in consumer debt in this country, and debt has been so normalized in our highly financialized economy. I'm not in favor of taking on debt. I have a car, it's an older car, it's a little car, it's a Chevy, it's a Honda Civic. And you know what? You know why I have a Honda Civic from like years and years ago? Because I don't want car debt, I don't want a car payment. I don't want to be a slave to debt for the rest of my life. But transitioning to an electric vehicle would require me to take on debt. $20,000 is not a small amount of money. These are issues that I wish the Democratic Party actually gave a damn about and actually thought through. Instead of just spouting out nonsense about like, oh, by 2035, we're gonna phase out all gas-powered cars, or 2/3 of all cars will be electric. Will they? How about the other side of that? How about thinking about the costs associated with that for ordinary people? God forbid they ever think about that. We gotta take a break. We've got more for you when we come back, including, how the private healthcare industry is stealing money from the Medicare trust with the help of the government. We'll be right back. Picks Rising, I love your comment so much. Thank you for writing in. So this is from our members section. I love Deep Dive Day. I like bringing up topics Anna discusses over beers with pals at my local brewery. I wish I could join you for those discussions. And I love that you guys talk about those things. And hopefully these are smart discussions and I, provide some information that can make those conversations better. Let's go to Beth, Mary Beth, who became a member. Thank you so much for supporting us and for keeping us independent from corporate influence. Asata Garbla also became a member. Thank you for showing your support. Christina writes in and says, oh, Anna looks beautiful. Thank you so much, Christina. Robin Anderson Wood says, oh boy, this is a hot topic, referring to the nuclear deep dive that I did. And it is, it's a weirdly hot topic. I don't know why it gets so heated. Look, I think it's an interesting nuanced topic. I'm not really heated about it one way or the other. So I just don't come for me, okay? It's gonna be all right. It's okay to have disagreements. Iwa Women says, I think it is the government's role and responsibility to pay for base EV infrastructure like public EV chargers. Couldn't agree with you more, 1000%. Stephen Ward, who's been a member for 15 months, says, keep up the good fight, TYT. Thank you, we intend to. Let's go to our super chats. I usually fall behind on those. All right, let's go to Stinky Feet, who says, trickle down. That trickle down you're feeling on your head ain't a tax credit. By the way, the other thing is, remember, we subsidize fossil fuel companies. How about instead of subsidizing fossil fuel companies, we subsidize ordinary Americans so they can afford these electric vehicles? How about that? We've got Pitchforks Dragon, who says, Anna's right, minor pushback. Over 90% of nuclear waste is low contamination items like clothes and gloves with a short half-life, not turtle ooze. Interesting, okay, I gotta look into that. We've got Al, who writes in, regarding electric cars, something to keep in mind is weight. As a local pollution issue, the gargantuan size of these things, because America, equals more pollution from tire degradation and brake dust pollution. We need to learn to walk. Oh, I love walking. I would love if we made our cities a lot more walkable. It's difficult in places like Los Angeles because of how sprawling it is. But when we were looking for a place to move, me and my husband specifically wanted an area that was very walkable. So on the weekends, I really don't drive much unless there's like a family event or something that I have to drive to. We can also obviously invest a lot more in, public transportation. But with public transportation, we also have to keep in mind, we gotta protect it and keep it safe so people feel comfortable using public transportation as well. So a lot to talk about, lots of nuance. Thank you for your comments. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian with you. We've been talking a lot and we've been updating you guys regularly on this whole private Medicare Advantage story and just how much they've been defrauding the federal government and stealing from the Medicare trust. I know it's a dense story. I know it's not the sexiest topic, but I want you to keep in mind, this is our money. We pay into the Medicare trust. And the fact that it's being robbed right now is infuriating. And unfortunately, we have a pretty terrible update on that story. United Health Group's chief executive bragged about how the Biden administration's ineffectiveness in cracking down on overbilling in Medicare Advantage has led to record profits. So the CEO, Andrew Whitty, told investors that he appreciates the White House's decision to slow the implementation of its Medicare Advantage reforms, which would prevent companies like United Health from potentially overbilling and stealing from United States taxpayers. United Health, as Common Dreams writes, United Health, one of the largest Medicare Advantage providers in the United States, reported $91.9 billion in revenue for the first 3 months of 2023, 15% growth year over year, and more than $8 billion in earnings from operations exceeding analysts' expectations. United Health, like other Medicare Advantage insurers, has been accused of wrongfully denying patients necessary care, in some cases utilizing artificial intelligence to determine whether or when to end coverage. And unfortunately, more and more seniors are signing up for Medicare Advantage, with some of them very likely not realizing that it's a privatized alternative to Medicare. The company, meaning United Health, said that it added 655,000 new Medicare Advantage members in the first quarter of the year. Now, we'll get back to United Health in just a moment, but first, here's a little context about what we learned recently about these Medicare Advantage programs. So Medicare Advantage is not the same as Medicare. It's a Medicare approved plan from a private company that offers an alternative to traditional Medicare. Much like private prisons, it's privately run, but publicly funded through the Medicare Trust. Aside from robbing the Medicare Trust through overbilling, other issues with Medicare Advantage includes, super narrow networks for providers that can severely limit access to care for the nation's elders. Many of the nation's largest health insurance companies have made billions of dollars, not just in revenue, in profits, by exploiting the government's Medicare Advantage program. A recent New York Times investigation found that 8 out of 10 of the largest Medicare Advantage providers overcharged the government. In fact, 6 of the 10 have been accused of fraud by both whistleblowers and government officials. Before the Biden administration could implement any rules to mitigate or prevent this fraud, private health insurance lobbyists did what they do best. They went to work. They went to Washington. United Health helped lead an aggressive lobbying campaign against new Biden administration rules aimed at limiting Medicare Advantage insurers' ability to overcharge the federal government by making patients appear sicker than they actually are. United Health CEO Andrew Whitty appeared on Capitol Hill in person to lobby against the proposed changes, which the lucrative Medicare Advantage industry falsely characterized as cuts to the program that now provides insurance to nearly half of the overall Medicare population. Now, that lobbying effort culminated with big rewards for the private healthcare industry. Just last month, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, otherwise known as CMS, agreed to slow down its regulatory agenda by imposing policy changes over a period of 3 years rather than all at once. By the way, with no justification. Like, why are you slowing down the implementation of these regulations? Is it because the lobbyists showed up and demanded you do so? CMS also agreed to boost Medicare Advantage payments or payment rates by more than previously expected. But just how bad has the overbilling been? We can get to some of those numbers. When it comes to excess billing, CMS, which by the way agreed to slow down their regulations and their crackdowns on overbilling, recently estimated that overpayments to Medicare Advantage totaled $11.4 billion in fiscal year 2022, a significant drain on the Medicare trust fund. Other estimates, according to Democracy Now!, were higher at $25 billion in 2020 alone. Citing one industry analyst, Stat News noted that United Health could reap $900 million in additional profit next year alone, thanks to the administration's decision to delay full implementation of reforms. Insurance giants, United Health, Cigna, CVS, Aetna, Elevance, Humana, you get the picture, and Molina saw their combined revenues from taxpayer-supported programs grow 500% between 2012 and 2022. United Health is one of just 7 large for-profit insurance companies that now control 70% of the Medicare Advantage market, which is dependent on taxpayer money, our taxpayer money. Taxpayer money that they steal by overbilling their patients, by overcharging and overbilling the Medicare trust. So it's incredible to me that on one hand, you have Republican lawmakers pretending to be panicked about the solvency of various social safety net programs, whether it be Social Security or in this case, the Medicare trust. Shouldn't we do something about the private companies that are defrauding the system? Shouldn't we crack down on that? And by the way, the Biden administration aiding and abetting the robbery in the first place, it's pretty disgusting. Like, what is he gonna do? Is he gonna blame Trump for that too? This is happening under his watch. The Biden administration is fully aware of what these private insurers are doing in stealing money through overbilling. And they're letting it happen. They're slowing down the implementation of these rules that are meant to crack down on this terrible behavior in the first place. Just something to keep in mind when the Democratic Party pretends to be better than Republicans. Because fact of the matter is, the whole corrupt political system that we're currently living under does not discriminate against Democrats. The money flows into the coffers of Democratic lawmakers and Democratic politicians as well. So just like Republicans, they do the bidding of corporate America. And in this particular case, they do the bidding of private insurance companies that are literally stealing money from the Medicare trust, a trust that we all pay into. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's end the first hour with, I guess, it's like our annual positive story about millionaires, I guess, because decent millionaires do exist. I always feel a little weird covering this because it seems like a PR stunt, but it seems like they really mean it. We looked into whether the individuals involved in this group are donating money to some nefarious politicians, and they're not. So let's talk about the patriotic millionaires.
I'm joined by Dr. Abigail Disney and a few dozen other members of Patriotic Millionaires here today with one request for America's lawmakers in there: tax us.
You just watched a man named Morris Pearl. He's the chair of a group known as the Patriotic Millionaires, pleading with American politicians to please tax the rich. In fact, they're arguing that if the United States government fails to do so, it could lead to the end of our democracy. Now, Pearl stated this, quote, "The tax code has been contributing to growing inequality for decades, and we're reaching a point where the concentration of wealth is simply unsustainable. We need a change, or our economy and our democracy will not survive. For my future, my grandchildren's future, and our country's future, we need to tax the rich." Now, I want to note, these are the patriotic millionaires. No word from the patriotic billionaires. Not so concerned about paying their fair share of taxes, but I'll continue. So what should be done about this issue? Well, here's Abigail Disney explaining the new and improved tax code that the patriotic millionaires would actually like to see signed into law.
The Patriotic Millionaires are here to offer 3 core principles for that tax framework. 1, treat all income over $1 million in the same manner, whether it's generated from ordinary income or capital gains or inheritance. 2, make our income tax code truly progressive. That means raising the standard deduction to charge nothing to people who don't even make a living wage, and it means imposing significantly higher marginal tax rates on extremely high incomes. And the third is pass a tax specifically designed to rein in wealth concentration, a wealth tax on the richest people in America. If we can do these 3 things, we can save America. And if we don't, we won't.
That was Walt Disney's, niece. Actually, Walt Disney is the great uncle of Abigail Disney. Anyway, moving on though, what she said there is absolutely correct. Our current tax system is simply not good enough at properly taxing the wealthiest people in our country. More details on that. A massive trove of IRS documents obtained by ProPublica last year showed that the 25 richest Americans, including Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and Tesla CEO Elon Musk, paid an average true tax rate of just 3.4% between 2014 and 2018, in large part because unrealized capital gains from stock appreciation are not taxed. So what they do is they have most of their assets invested. Those investments keep growing, and what they'll do is they will get loans and use those investments, the unrealized gains from those investments, as collateral. And they'll just live off that debt, which of course they get all sorts of favorable terms for. And that's how they avoid having to pay any taxes, including capital gains taxes, which are lower than income taxes. It's absolutely insane. That was a pretty explosive report by ProPublica. We talked about it on the show. I highly recommend you guys go back and watch that report or read the ProPublica report if you have like an afternoon to yourself, because those reports are super long. But nonetheless, while billionaires are laughing all the way to the bank, the rest of us are, in fact, suffocating financially. According to an Oxfam America analysis published just last week, US billionaires have gotten 86% richer over the past decade, with $37 of every $100 of wealth created between 2012 and 2021 going to the top 1%. The bottom 50% only received $2 for every $100 of wealth generated during that period, according to Oxfam. And the number of US billionaires, of which there are now more than 700, is also nearly 60% higher than it was a decade ago, according to the analysis. So the money is moving from everyone else, middle class, the working poor, all the way to the top. So the billionaires can get richer. It is unbelievable. Well, it is believable when you consider the way the system is set up. This is the way it works. This is why letting the wealthiest people in the country get away with paying very little in taxes, a much smaller percentage in income taxes than ordinary Americans do, leads to inequality, which leads to anger and resentment, and leads to divisions in the country. I really do think that is the heart of the divisiveness that we're seeing in the United States and elsewhere. The rhetoric of patriotic millionaires is all well and good, but are these wealthy individuals actually putting their money where their mouth is? I've always wondered about that, right? Because it's real easy to say, like, we want the government to tax us more. But what are you doing to make it happen? Well, each member donation varied. The common thread was that most of them have donated tens, if not tens of thousands of dollars to the Democratic Senatorial Committee, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and or DNC Services, the DNC Services Corporation. So here's one detail. So Morris Pearl, the man that we opened the story with, donated a few $1,000s to politicians I like a lot, like Nina Turner, Jessica Cisneros, who ran for a House seat in Texas 2 times, unfortunately lost. But I really hope she runs again because she is a wonderful progressive. So when it comes to them putting their money where their mouth is, I love to see that Morris Pearl, who is again the chair of Patriotic Millionaires, is supporting the right kinds of candidates. And based on our research, we haven't seen any other member donate money to nefarious politicians who want to deregulate industry and cut taxes further for the wealthiest people. So it seems like they're real about this and they're genuinely trying to change the way taxes are paid in the country. And I hope they succeed, and I think they're right. We absolutely do need to change something because the inequality that we're experiencing is leading to more division, more hatred, and it could make the difference when it comes to protecting our democratic process. All right, we gotta take a quick break. John Idarola is waiting to come in. He's just itching to come in and talk to you all. So stick around, we'll be right back.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere. That's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one. Here at the Young Turks, we do our best to bring you the most essential news stories of the day, but we can't cover everything in a 2-hour show. And for the rest, I recommend Ground News. Founded by a former NASA scientist, Ground News uses a revolutionary system that analyzes where the news is coming from and gives you complete transparency on the potential biases these sources may have. That way, you can read between the lines of media bias and break free from the corporate media agenda. In arming you with the context and transparency, you'll have everything you need to think critically about the news and build responsible media literacy for yourself and others. With Ground News, you're not just mindlessly consuming the media, you're part of a movement that is working to hold them accountable and get straight to the facts. Break through the filter bubbles, the propaganda, and the bias, and subscribe to Ground News today.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
I got pulled in, they told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media, I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war, so everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. You have to do corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works. We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Okay, Bart Kyle has a message to me. Hold on a second. In the Idaho family tree, your grandpa played the sax really well and was not a nerd. John, are you sure you weren't switched at birth from the hospital?
Nerd.
comments about how right I am, so I'm gonna go to Wolf Dragon Donna, who says, Anna, you're so right to be mad about yet another huge financial burden being put on the non-elite. And that's in regard to the policies that compel people to buy electric vehicles without actually offering real financial assistance for it. So yeah, I'm pretty furious about that. I just love how the right wing took my comments about that as like confirmation that I agree with them. I don't agree with them. I want to transition to cleaner energy.
Yeah, you're not saying you want to cut both the requirement and the funding. You want to give more funding.
I want the funding, exactly.
Yeah.
And when I say funding, I'm not talking about like, here's some chump change in the form of tax credits that might be applied to the vehicle depending on where the vehicle is manufactured. It's just, it's so dumb.
Yeah, they need to broaden that. And raise the amount.
Yes, yes.
And also subsidize the research of like solid state batteries and other stuff to get the price down, yeah.
Totally agree with you on that. All right, James writes in and says, trickle down is another word for golden showers. And you're right about that. You're exactly right about it. They definitely feel more like golden showers than anything else.
And those are the fanciest showers.
Crazy.
Trumpian.
Oh, John. All right, you wanna talk a little bit about bottom of the barrel fundraising by the GOP?
Let's do it. Does it involve a golden shower?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised these days. So let's talk about it. A Republican group in Idaho has invited Kyle Rittenhouse to speak at their annual gala, or gala, depending on how you like to call it. It happened last weekend, and more alarmingly, they decided to auction off tickets to what they named Trigger Time with Kyle Rittenhouse. What is that, you may ask? Well, here's a bit of a refresher on Kyle Rittenhouse first so you understand. There's the ad for what they were doing. But nonetheless, Kyle Rittenhouse, for those of you who were living under a rock and completely missed the story, ended up shooting and killing 2 protesters at a Black Lives Matter protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin nearly 3 years ago when he was just 17 years old. So since then, he's been hailed as a hero by the right wing. He did stand trial for the 2 killings, and he was acquitted of murder charges because his self-defense argument was convincing for the jury. Now, the Bonneville County Republican Central Committee in Idaho featured Rittenhouse as the main attraction and keynote speaker at their Lincoln Day Gala. It was at the gala where they auctioned tickets for people to go shooting with Kyle the following morning. Okay, so now we can take a look at this flyer that they were passing around. Exclusive event, Trigger Time with Kyle Rittenhouse. Only 30 people are lucky enough to do this, John. They get range time, autographs, photos, rifles, rounds, refreshments. Sounds like a lot of fun for people who, for some reason, think that guy who killed 2 people should be a celebrity that they go shooting with. Now, there was also a Ruger AR 556 photographed, or autographed, I should say, by Kyle Rittenhouse, and a painted red, white, and blue. It was painted red, white, and blue, and it started with a floor bid of just $3,000. So that's what they auctioned off. I'm gonna stop for comment.
I think that it's a good use of their money. I mean, we should probably bear in mind that anyone who would be bidding on this probably already owns like 30 of those guns, but why not spend way more for one with a garish, embarrassing paint job and a signature of someone that you're not even gonna remember exists in a few years? I think that's a good use of your money. That's an investment, really.
I disagree with you.
I always lose all of my money in investments though, so bear that in mind, but I think it's a good investment.
You have money to invest? Surprising.
Only in guns. No, it's a complete and utter waste of money. I know why they want that. I know why they think they want to do this. These 30 people with more money, rage, and fear of anyone unlike them than they have sense. What do you think that time is going to be like with him? Do you think the fact that he killed people makes him interesting?
Okay, so
look at his face. We know exactly what his personality is. His personality is a guy who only becomes notable when he kills people. That's it. It's not a fun conversation with this guy. The time is gonna suck and you're gonna be out the money. That's gonna be it.
And the fact that they're auctioning off, or they have already auctioned off, because this event happened already, an assault style weapon, which, keep in mind, Kyle Rittenhouse used an AR-15. to gun down the 2 protesters. It's just, look, the issue that I have with this, this is a Republican event. It doesn't surprise me that they're auctioning off guns and they're auctioning off like shooting events. This is what they like. It's part of their culture. I don't agree with fetishizing guns the way they do, but the thing that I find incredibly frustrating about this situation is, look, you can say that in your mind, Kyle Rittenhouse did nothing wrong because he legitimately defended himself. It's what he had to do. But taking people's lives, even in the situation where you're defending yourself, is awful, right? Like 2 people died. That's not something to celebrate. And the problem that I have is making Kyle Rittenhouse like a celebrity over what he did, rather than framing it as, it sucks that he felt the need to do that. It sucks that he did it. It sucks that 2 people are dead. It is what it is, but let's not celebrate this as if it's like a wonderful thing. But they celebrate it as if it's a wonderful thing. 2 people are dead.
Yeah, it sucks that he made a series of intentional decisions that put him in that position to do that thing that clearly he did not have that much of a problem with doing. All of that absolutely sucks. How much, I guess he's being treated as a hero, kind of, for a little bit or whatever. I don't know how much regular conservatives give a damn about him. I know why Republican elites would want to push him as a hero on other people. They want regular conservatives to not notice that they keep falling behind more and more and more every year economically, and instead just distract themselves with the idea that someday they might be lucky enough to be in a position to get away with killing people. I get why they would want to do that. And for Kyle Rittenhouse, he probably knows deep down in his heart that this is the only way that he'll ever be exceptional. So why not take these speaking opportunities? He knows that if and when they eventually cast him aside for someone else who commits a massacre, that he's gonna have absolutely nothing. He's not gonna be able to get honest work. He's not gonna be qualified for much of the honest work anyway. So all of them are kind of desperate for this to work and to hold it out as long as they can.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And look, I don't begrudge Kyle Rittenhouse for taking the money, right? Whatever they might pay him to be part of this, I don't begrudge him for it. I mean, he's still incredibly young, and the positive treatment he's gotten from the right wing after gunning down 2 people, it just sends the wrong message to someone who's still incredibly young. It reminds me a little of what happened with George Zimmerman after he killed Trayvon Martin, right? Because he was treated as a celebrity.
No, his life turned out great.
I mean, it didn't, but he then proceeded to get involved in all sorts of domestic violence. I mean, we covered more follow-up stories about him after the fact. And it's when you're telling people who commit acts of violence that it's okay and that they should be celebrated as heroes for what they did, very likely that they're gonna carry out more violence. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, they wouldn't want that. They wouldn't want more Perrys down in Texas. They wouldn't want more people gunning down teenagers who accidentally ring their doorbell. They wouldn't want any of that. That's not what all of this is about. This is not about spending time with a celebrity because he's not a celebrity. Kyle Rittenhouse doesn't want to spend time with Kyle Rittenhouse. This is about putting them in proximity to someone who's lived out their fantasy. The fantasy of killing people who they disagree with. That's what it is. But honestly, it's a pretty piss poor version of the fantasy. The fantasy isn't to go to a gun range. They could do that anytime they want. They're rich, they could do that. The fantasy is to kill or be killed. And so honestly, for this to be a satisfying recreation of why they know who he is in the first place, it would only make sense if he ended up shooting them or they ended up shooting him. One of those 2 things would make it a fitting tribute to why they care about Kyle Rittenhouse. Instead, they're gonna drink a couple of non-Bud Light beers, shoot some rounds, realize that their souls are empty, and then they're gonna go back to their unhappy lives.
So
thanks for the $3,000, you moron.
We're gonna end on this because, as I mentioned, Rittenhouse was like a keynote speaker at the gala. And so
I bet it was a great speech too.
Well, you're about to see because he was asked to reflect on, his past and how he feels about gun control proposals today. Let's hear what he had to say.
If you could go back, is there anything you would have done differently during that whole Kenosha episode?
If I would have known what would have happened, if I would have known I would have been ambushed, chased down, had guns pointed in my face, and then put on trial for defending my life, I wouldn't have gone. I would have stayed home. But that does not change the fact that I was violently and viciously attacked by a mob of rioters.
What is your basic message to others about the Second Amendment, especially as it pertains to the right of self-defense?
Bad guys are gonna still get guns. We aren't gonna have this whole thing where gun control is gonna work. Look at Chicago, look at New York, look at Los Angeles. The statistics are there. Criminals are gonna get guns and they're gonna commit crimes. It's not gonna lower the unfortunate school shootings. It's not gonna stop these bad, mentally ill, disturbed individuals from causing harm to others. What will is a good guy with a gun.
Except there were good guys with guns on multiple school campuses as school shootings were taking place, and they were not able to stop the shooter. In fact, Uvalde is a perfect example where you have literally dozens of law enforcement officials there, heavily armed. They weren't able to stop the shooter. In fact, their cowardice is now incredibly notorious. And finally, it's such a weak argument in my mind to say like bad guys are gonna get their hands on guns anyway. Okay, people are gonna drive under the influence of drugs and alcohol anyway, so should we just do away with any regulation pertaining to drunk driving or driving?
People are gonna get abortions anyway.
It's just such a dumb, it's a dumb argument. I'm just gonna call it what it is. But more importantly, maybe the bad guys are getting their hands on the gun so easily because it's so easy to buy a gun without a background check. I mean,
yeah, it's an argument that doesn't make sense in our context. And the second you think about any country that actually has gun control, it makes even less sense. Most of these, many countries, many incredibly successful countries, you can't get access to these guns. So why don't the criminals who are just gonna get the guns anyway run wild? They don't, because you can't get the guns, you idiot. That's what. His idea about there always needing to be a good guy with a gun. Imagine if there had been a responsible good guy with a gun in Kenosha, maybe one of those many cops nearby. They could have done something about the fact that there was an idiot running around with an AR-15 killing people. They could have solved that situation. It's too bad that in that case there wasn't a good guy with a gun. And having him speak there really fast, delivering the exact same stupid debunked points as we've heard 1,000 times before, only at a lower grade level and a lower energy level. If you want that, then waste your money and hire Leave It to Beaver.
Well, they did. So, congratulations.
They are so desperate for a hero. This is what they've got.
Yep, doesn't speak so well of them, but here we are. All right, look, our next story is different. It's about elite breeders, literally, who want to encourage us all to have more kids. Well, not all of us, some of us. We've got that story and more coming up, don't miss it. Got a lot of great comments from our TYT members. I'm gonna start with Shy Coltrane 42, who wanted to share thoughts on the nuclear segment that I did earlier. One of the main fears in having nuclear power plants is that it can be a primary target from the enemy. Ukraine is Exhibit A. I know, look, I thought of that as well, which is why I was so surprised that Ukraine has actually placed its bets on nuclear energy, which is why it's agreed to buy some new nuclear related technology that's developed in the United States. I just did not expect that. So look, it really just depends on a cost benefit analysis. Al Belzo writes in and says, Belso writes in and says, I believe we should be moving toward improving nuclear energy power, not shut it down completely. All new technology goes through growing pains. We have already learned from past incidents. We can minimize accidents in the future if we keep improving what we already know. And look, I want to explore this topic more in future shows. So that wasn't the one and only segment that we'll do on it. I want to keep exploring it, researching it. I'm certainly not an expert on it. I'm just sharing what I know. It'd be cool if you and I collaborate on it to some extent, John, because you're freaking brilliant on these issues. So
I mean, I'm by no means an expert in nuclear. I know some stuff. I've read some books. But
no, I know, but balancing the very real concerns in regard to climate change with transitioning away from nuclear. I think it's like a really interesting topic.
Well, I would say transitioning away from nuclear energy as it was constituted in decades past.
Right.
A lot of the newer technology is very different.
And very expensive. That's the other thing to keep in mind. So there's just a lot of nuance in that topic. We will continue talking about it in future shows. All right, let's move on to more people who love me and agree with me. I'm just kidding. But seriously, Mary Beth writes in our Twitch subs and says, Anna's absolutely right. I'm an EV owner and I love my car. I bought it right after the Inflation Reduction Act was signed because that is when I legitimately needed a car, and my Kia EV6 didn't qualify anymore. And now because of my income, I don't qualify for any car. I'm a high earner, but it was still a stretch for me. I don't know how regular people will do it. And I live in Kentucky and charging infrastructure is lacking. I don't know what I would do if I did not charge at home. Yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with that issue now in my building where we don't have charging stations, but some of the people most people in my building are on fixed income. They're all retired. I don't know how they're gonna afford this. They're gonna take out a massive loan to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the electric rewiring that needs to be done for the charging stations. I'm stressed out about it, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Dolores in the darkness writes in and says, I don't know, but I think if I were ever forced to kill someone in self-defense, that last thing I would want is to keep talking about it and doing things that reminded me of it, which just goes to show his whole defense was BS. I mean, that's such a great point. Killing someone, taking someone's life, even in a situation where the person is a threat to you, an imminent threat to you, that is not something that I would take lightly. Like that would be incredibly traumatizing and difficult.
Maybe you would go around the country talking about it if you were in a desperate, futile, lifelong effort to convince yourself that what you did was anything other than truly, personally, intentionally evil.
Right.
If you were trying to still the voices in your head, which temporarily go away when there's applause, but as soon as you lay your head down in bed, you suddenly hear your internal monologue again, and it doesn't sound the same, it's a little bit more critical. Maybe then you'd keep talking about it.
I know this is a little bit of a different topic, but the thing that really, I don't know, gave me nightmares about the story we covered yesterday about the 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, who was shot by that 84-year-old potentially racist man. I think about the impact it has on the teenager's mental health because he did survive, luckily, right? But that's a traumatizing thing and it's gonna have an impact on him for a long time, if not the rest of his life. But I also think about his mom, right? And I think about his parents and what it must feel like to know that there are people out there who have complete disregard for your own child's life. Like, I'd lose my mind.
I mean, the 1-2-3 punch of that story, what happened in upstate New York and what just happened in Texas, those three things, goodbye faith in humanity.
It's so depressing. Okay, let's move on to something much more serious, guys. Elite breeders. This is amazing.
Once you have birth control and abortions and whatnot, now you can still satisfy the limbic instinct, but not procreate. So we haven't yet evolved to deal with that because this is all fairly recent, last 50 years or so for birth control. So I'm sort of worried that, hey, civilization, if we don't make enough people to at least sustain our numbers, perhaps increase a little bit, then civilization is going to crumble. There's the old question of like, will civilization end with a bang or a whimper?
Will civilization end with a bang or a whimper? That is Elon Musk freaking out about low birth rates, and he's blaming birth control for the low birth rates. Now, the high costs associated with raising kids in a country that offers absolutely no financial support could be a problem as well, but he doesn't get into that because, God forbid, we have a government that we pay through our taxes that works for us. We'll get to that in just a moment, John. But let's talk a little bit about weirdo rich people who are super concerned about whether or not we're banging it out and whether or not we're procreating enough. And look, to be sure, the way our economy is run, you need a workforce. And in order to have a workforce that replaces an aging workforce, you need to have kids. I get that. But if you're genuinely concerned about it, I don't know, how about incentivize having children by making it easier financially? Now, let's get back to the weirdos like Musk. This isn't the first time that Elon Musk has brought up this issue. He's made similar comments in the past, including what I'm about to read you. So Musk, who has had 10 children with 3 different women, told a business summit in December of 2021, if people don't have more children, civilization is going to crumble. Mark my words. He has described population collapse as the biggest danger to humanity, exceeding climate change, and warned that Japan, which has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, will eventually cease to exist. John, you are having a reaction to these concerns from Elon Musk. Share your concerns with me.
We have found something worse than the 2-decade-long effort that Fox News has engaged in to destroy everyone's faith in academia, science, expertise. That's worse. A fake replacement for it. There are actually people who are experts on these topics that do research and write books about this. Elon Musk does not. What he does do is he has a name that people know and he talks about a thing as if he understands it. There are so many things in that very brief audio that he clearly does not understand about this. First of all, we talked about this a little bit on TDR this morning. The idea that, well, we only had abortion and birth control now. I mean, it's only been 50 years that we've been able to satisfy the limbic instinct without reproducing. That's not true at all. There have been condoms for a long time. There have been things people take to induce miscarriage. There have been all sorts of things for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that people have been using. The idea that Japan is going to cease to exist, he doesn't seem to understand that incentives change over time as situations change. The same sorts of changing incentives that are leading people in the modern era to want less kids, particularly as some areas become overpopulated, will change as incentives as the population falls, perhaps making them more likely to have more kids. He seems to think that like once you turn, there's no going back. There's no reason to believe that. And there was no good follow-up question from Tucker Carlson. Anyway,
wow.
Whole thing frustrating.
Wow, like there was no good follow-up question from Tucker Carlson.
No, Tucker Carlson just did this. As if what he was hearing was Socrates lecturing or something. You have a blithering idiot across from you. Ask a good question.
Okay, so look, Elon Musk is a goofball, but he's not the only person who is pretending to be very concerned about low birth rates. And who knows, maybe he genuinely is. I mean, he does have 10 freaking kids. Like 10 kids is a lot of kids. But anyway, there is a pro-natalism movement, okay, taking hold. They don't really have real solutions.
They like NATO, they want more countries to enter it, I get it.
Not NATOism.
Trump is gonna be pissed.
Natalism.
They don't pay their due, you know?
Pro-NATOism, that's hilarious. Okay, so the core tenet, according to the Telegraph, which I think is anyway.
What?
Isn't the Telegraph tabloidy?
I mean, you can do profiles of these sorts of people in all sorts of different.
Yeah, and they've given quotes. So let's get to who these people are. So the core tenet is deceptively simple. Our future depends on having enough children, and yet life in developed countries has become hostile to this basic biological imperative. How has it become hostile? Are you kidding? I'm a woman, okay?
What?
I'm a woman. And all I hear all day, every day is, are you gonna have kids? When are you gonna have kids? How come you guys don't have kids? You're married, right? You guys love each other. Why don't you have kids? Where are you gonna have kids? Where are you gonna have kids? You're gonna die alone. Have kids, have kids.
I was actually wondering.
Have kids, have kids.
I was gonna ask about
all day,
that.
every day. Like all day, every day.
Yeah.
My best friend's mother, who lives in Kentucky but visited like a few weeks ago, like the second she saw me, she's like, so are you guys gonna have kids?
I get it.
Okay, so
it's
like
people showing interest, but I understand it's
guys,
everybody constantly.
No, but like, don't show interest, because what you are asking someone is deeply personal and also creepy. Like, are you and your husband banging it out with protection?
And
or
when you
protection?
do you take off the protection?
Yeah, exactly. It's super creepy.
And then also, maybe they've been trying. Maybe they, not you, they. I mean, they, the person you're talking to. Maybe they've been trying for literally years. Maybe they've gone through a sequence of devastating miscarriages. Maybe you are unearthing unknowingly a traumatic experience for them.
By the way, and I love my best friend's mom. It's like, it's just
no,
an
I hate
example.
her. Never met her. Not a fan.
It's an example of what the culture is actually like, despite what these fools say.
Yeah,
so with
this
that
is
said,
the anti-natalism movement, by the way. The Telegraph should call you.
I'm part of the freedom movement, okay? And the freedom movement is make the choices that are right for you. Having children isn't right for everybody, okay?
I know.
And if you're genuinely concerned about people not having kids for whatever reason, you incentivize it by making society supportive toward people who want to have kids, not through rhetoric and discourse, but through policy. You get what I'm saying?
You trick them. You trick them psychologically with a book they won't ever read. Look, I don't know. It's to the extent that I agree with that statement that life has become hostile to it. I would say the economy has become increasingly hostile.
Yes.
Now, maybe that's a part of this movement. I don't know.
No, I have not seen that.
If it is, then respect, I guess.
So look, mostly Silicon Valley people are part of this, right? Now, they
tend to be poor, right? If I remember correctly, I think so. Okay, so they're probably thinking about that.
Not poor at all. But I do want to draw your attention to one couple, not in Silicon Valley, but in Pennsylvania. Okay, Simone and Malcolm Collins. They are also convinced of the merits of the pro-natalism movement and have taken it upon themselves to engage in this crusade to save the world by encouraging others to breed. Okay.
That's fine. They look lovely, they look happy, I guess.
In 2021, I'm not gonna comment on how they look. I think that they should mind their own business. That's what I think, you know?
Okay.
They look happy. And anyway, but let me move on. So in 2021, they actually founded this group called pronatalist.org with $482,000 in funding from an Estonian tech billionaire named John Tallinn, who supports similar causes. So what I don't understand is, while they are signing on to the pro-natalist movement, if you could even call it a movement, and while they received nearly $500,000 in funding to push this movement, or at least their portion of this movement, they admit that they have no solutions for the low birth rates. So how did you get paid? Like, why did you get paid? Why would anyone hand over $500,000 to you if you're like, what are you doing? Like, what's your point?
I can think of a few reasons that different groups that might be kind of dissimilar ideologically might want to support that. As I'm sure you're going to get into, there's obviously, I'm not saying they are, but historically there has been a fairly explicitly white supremacist train of thought that leads to this. I'm sure that they have nothing to do with that, but sure.
Well, so there is a problem with the pro-natalist movement in that, you know, the branding does bring up some pretty dark elements of the past, you know? So falling birth rates are also, you know, a common preoccupation of neo-Nazis, a little bit of a problem, and other ethno-nationalists who believe they are being outbred or replaced by other races. Also, a zeal for large families has often been accompanied by patriarchal gender politics. But they claim, no, we want nothing to do with any of that. Malcolm Collins, who's one of the pro-natalists, says people often compare our group to Handmaid's Tale-like thinking. And I'm like, excuse me, do you know what happens if we, the voluntary movement, fails? Cultures will eventually find a way to fix this. How horrifying those mechanisms are depends on whether or not our group finds an ethical way.
What in the hell?
That, I don't know. I just don't think that helped his cause much.
There's a much simpler answer to that, buddy. We're not the Handmaid's Tale because we want this to all be voluntary.
Yeah.
That's your answer.
That's your answer.
We don't want anyone to be enslaved and forced to give birth. And as far as I know, that is their position.
We want to take the nearly $500,000 that this Estonian tech billionaire handed over to us to lobby Congress to pass economic policies that are friendlier to individuals and families who want to have children. How about that?
Oh, that's not what they're, because that sounds good.
That would be great.
I like that.
That is not
Child
what they're
tax
saying.
credit
That
and
is not
such.
what they're saying. There's just, I don't understand.
I mean, for all I know, I would assume that they support that sort of thing because that would increase the odds. And by the way, not every group that's advocating for something has to take care of every bit of policy that paves the way. They might be trying to philosophically influence people in the hopes that those people will also pressure government. That's entirely possible.
They define themselves as politically conservative. So it gives you a sense of where they might stand on, social safety net programs and economic policies that redistribute the insane amount of wealth at the very top toward, ordinary people who might forego starting a family because of the astronomical costs associated with it.
Yeah.
If you are genuine, I don't want to hear from another wealthy person about oh my God, the falling birth rates. If you are a proponent of tax cuts, if you are a proponent of gutting our social safety net, you're not serious about your concern about birth rates falling.
Yeah, it's kind of, I'm not saying for them, but for a lot of conservatives who might, at face value agree with them, it's almost perfect what they're doing. So I don't know what they were talking about there with the cultures will find a way to figure this out, the mechanisms will be horrifying. I mean, I would say, well, it seems like that's what conservatives are trying to do in banning abortion and soon birth control and IVF and all that stuff, like getting involved in all of it. So then you force a bunch of people who have already made clear that they don't want kids and in many cases don't have the economic means to raise them, to have them anyway. So you get what you want. Now they're screwed. Their lives are gonna be significantly harder. How do you think that the kids that they're gonna be raising, they're gonna just be set up for success, obviously. That'll create all sorts of further economic and social issues that the right can then use to fearmonger and demonize those people for another few generations. So it's kind of like a closed economy of forcing people to have kids that will then produce the culture war fodder that they need.
It is kind of perfect when you think about it.
That's not on these pro-natalists. By the way, what the hell is with that name? We're told constantly that libs are bad at coming up with names for things. We're the baby boosters or something. Pro-natalist, that sounds like the position you use to knock up your partner. That doesn't sound like your philosophy or whatever.
All right.
Do something appealing. Put the word baby in it.
Our branding critic A-Team is here to share his disdain for the pro-natalist.
No, I can't do that. It hurts my back. That's what it sounds like to me.
Now, finally, I'm just gonna leave you with this last comment from basically Malcolm in regard to what they propose to do to increase the birth rates. What is to be done? Our solution is, we don't have a solution, he admits. He says the only things proven to increase birth rates are poverty and the oppression of women, which are bad and should be stamped out.
So that is, I'm assuming that's true. Generally, birth rates are higher in places where there's more poverty and where women don't have rights. You didn't need to bring it up though. I'm just spitballing here. We wind the clock back 200 years. No, wait, that would be bad, I guess. I'm not saying he believes that, but why do you keep bringing up these things that make you look crazy? There's a perfectly innocent answer to all of this, theoretically. You're going for the vaguely ominous one every time.
Insane. All right, let's take our final break. When we come back, we absolutely need to talk about how much of a social media star Marianne Williamson has become. And if we have time, maybe we will lighten things up with NFTs. Don't miss it, we'll be right back.
Elon. Ice cream.
Anna is a woman.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our social break. Lots of comments here. Let's start with Stinky Feet, who has a comment about Meatball Ron. Meatball Ron has an NFT too. Turns out it's just a picture of his fingers digging into chocolate pudding. I think I'll pass. Did you see that Trump ad attacking DeSantis for eating pudding with his fingers?
You have to ask me that question?
I know.
I have thought about little else since then.
Okay, all right. You didn't have to go that far.
It's the best ad ever.
It's so good, right? Yes, I agree. Totally agree with you. Okay, Jonah Morton says, you can pollute a small area with nuclear waste, or you can kill us all with petro energy. NASA was developing spent rod spacecraft before budget cuts. Okay.
I think using the rods that had been used in nuclear energy to power spacecraft, I believe.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay. We've got Jana, Jana Temple, thank you for your super chat, I appreciate it. Banana Dragon says, the federal government does not have the power to enforce this EV policy on all states. There will surely be pushback from some states. You rock, Anna. No, there will definitely be pushback. And I have no doubt that if Biden's EPA really plans to push this through, it'll be challenged in the courts. It'll make its way to the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court would strike it down. I am curious what's gonna happen on a state level though, because California is special. Let me just put it that way. California is very special these days. Can't freaking stand it. Okay, Jason Ray writes in and says, half the country lives paycheck to paycheck and make $30,000 or less a year and can't afford a $500 emergency, but sure, $25,000 to $30,000 on a new car to get to work. I know, I mean, again, I'm not against the electric vehicles. I'm against not providing the financial assistance to make that transition. Sue writes in and says, since I have been on Medicare since 2008, I have never signed up for these companies. I use Medicare and Medicaid and 100% of my medical expenses are paid. You know, Medicare is pretty sweet and I hope it's around when we're ready to use it.
Fingers crossed. I've been doing everything to my body necessary to need it real bad coming up.
Chaplain Fred, AKA Prayer Dragon, writes it and says, hi Anna and Dragon Daddy. I own a Tesla and when I bought it, Tesla installed a charging station for free, but it has been at least 6 years, but I hear you.
Chevrolet used to do that at one point. I don't think they do now, but.
Yeah. These things are expensive, folks. The government has the money. We can see how much they spend on defense. How about helping us out? Let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and John Idarola, host of The Damage Report here at TYT Network, which you can watch Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern.
Can I promote to our show?
Yes.
I'm gonna be joined by Jessica Burbank and we're gonna be interviewing Steven Donziger. It's gonna be awesome.
Oh, nice.
We've been trying to set it up for a while and we finally got it.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get to our next story because Marianne Williamson totally killing it on TikTok.
For the richest country in the world not to have universal health care, for the richest country in the world not to have paid family leave, for the richest country in the world not to have tuition-free colleges, and for one reason only, because we have a corporate aristocracy where the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies, the big food companies, the big chemical companies, the big agricultural companies, the gun manufacturers, big oil and defense contractors own this country. And when you ask me what was different between now and 4 years ago, I think it's how many people have awakened on the left and on the right to the fact that we have basically a form of corporate tyranny.
Democratic 2024 presidential candidate Marianne Williamson might be treated as a joke by corporate media, but they should be careful because when it comes to TikTok, man, she is blowing up. Apparently, her videos with the kinds of messages that you just heard in the video we showed you happen to be very appealing to the young TikTok users, and she has grown an enormous following on TikTok as a result. So in just a moment, we'll actually tell you just how popular she is on this platform. And remember, when it comes to elections, young people are playing a bigger role. They made all the difference in the midterm elections and could potentially make all the difference in the upcoming presidential election in 2024. First, let's play a few of her other clips, including some of her most popular TikToks, so you can kind of get a feel of what her message is and which messages tend to appeal to a younger audience.
Why do you want to be president?
I want to be president because this country needs to make an economic U-turn. And the system that effectuates and perpetuates that kind of income and opportunity inequality is not changing itself. Why is it that we don't have free college, which we had here in the United States till the 1960s? And by the way, when I was growing up, Blue Cross Blue Shield was a nonprofit. Why don't we have what they have in every other advanced democracy? As in free childcare, as in paid family leave after the birth of a child, as in guaranteed sick pay, as in a guaranteed livable wage. They are not going to do this. The president approved yesterday the Willow Project, which is a massive fossil fuel extraction plan in Alaska. I would cancel that the first day. I want universal health care like in every other advanced democracy, and the president has said that he would veto a Medicare for all bill if it came to his desk. If people have universal health care, if people can go to college, if we get rid of these college loan debts, if we have a higher minimum wage, this will actually stimulate the economy.
I mean, every message shared in that video, I agree with. Now, maybe the minute details of each policy might differ from what I would prefer versus what she prefers. I have to really sit down and read what proposal she's gonna push for. But overall, I can totally understand why that video would appeal to not just young voters, not just young TikTokers, but anyone who has experienced the rig economic system in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you were hearing there sounds very similar to the sorts of messages that Bernie Sanders would deliver. Obviously, her delivery style is a little bit different. It's snappy, which I like.
Yeah, I like it too.
Which is good. But yeah, and remember, Bernie Sanders did really, really well in the last go round of the Democratic primary. So that sort of message, I think, has an obvious audience. We're 4 years later now, which means that people who were up to 4 years too young to vote last time around are now in the system, and we know how the generation is trending in terms of progressive politics. So I think it makes all the sense in the world. I had her on my show. We talked quite a bit. It's obviously an incredibly difficult task to take on. If Biden does run, that is as high of a political mountain to climb as anything.
Yep.
But I think that she's doing a very good job.
I think she is too, and the Democratic establishment has kind of brushed her off, and Karine Jean-Pierre during a White House press briefing was incredibly dismissive of her and mocked her, and I really didn't like that. I thought it was a bad look. But getting back to Marianne Williamson, she seems to understand the importance of engagement, and so she also addresses her viewers time to time. Let's take a look at that.
I was at a drag show last night at East Tennessee University in protest of a bill, an anti-drag show, anti-transgender, anti-LGBTQIA+ bill that came down from the State House in Tennessee, but which then got blocked by a judge for at least 14 days. So that's good. So they're going to have to revisit that. Those kinds of changes happen because of the energy that people put out, and that means you. That means you when it comes to this campaign. Yesterday, an A-rated 538 poll came out with us at 10%. And that's kind of extraordinary. And that is because of you, all of you who are telling your friends, getting on social media, getting on TikTok, getting on Instagram, doing all the things that you do. More than anything, I just want to say thank you. And my team told me that when I talk to you like this, I should leave it to under a minute. I made it to, I don't even know how to talk for under a minute, but I'm trying. And truly from my heart, thank you.
I feel seen with that last bit. I have the same problem.
No, don't worry. John, Marianne, if you want advice on how to be concise and not speak over 1 minute, just talk to Cenk. He's an expert at that. Just kidding. Why'd I do him dirty?
He's not even a part of this.
Here.
Yeah.
He's not even here to defend
Under the
himself.
bus.
I know. I love you, Cenk.
Yeah.
Anyway, but let's get back to Marianne Williamson's popularity on TikTok because it is reflected in the numbers, John. So she's only posted 65 videos on TikTok, yet has drawn more than 12 million views, according to TikTok Data Counter. But there are also endless Marianne Stan accounts that post her speeches and rack up massive numbers. I want to get to some more information regarding how much support she has from young people in just a moment. But before I do it, there was actually a moment on the damage report, John, during your interview with her that I thought, I wanted to highlight it. I thought it was an important, no, it was a good moment.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because Francesca asked a really good question. You were co-hosting with her that day as you two were interviewing her. And I think Marianne Williamson's answer was a really good one. So let's take a look at that.
I have a question, Marianne, about how you defeat the right in this country when they are so clearly, they believe themselves to be spiritually superior. They believe themselves to be abiding by, I don't know, whatever God told them to make women second-class citizens, take away the abortion rights, demonize LGBTQ plus people, demonize things like drag shows, pretend like you're helping children when in fact you're just dooming them even further. We've got a pretty spiritually bankrupt opposition in this country. How do you deal with a party that clearly was just never hugged enough as a child as a political strategy? Like, what do you do?
Well, to be honest, you don't say some of the things that you just said. First of all, I'm not thinking in terms of defeating the right. At this point, I think that it's very difficult to wage an argument based on moral or spiritual principles when you yourself act like you're too cool to have that conversation. And I think that's been a problem on the left now for decades. I don't want to defeat anyone. I want to help arouse a new coalition of conscience, as Martin Luther King would say. People on the left and the right who are just done with that oppositional mentality, are done with the silos, who recognize that it's not the energy, it's not the conversation that is going to take us where we need to be. There are high-minded conservative principles. There are high-minded liberal principles. Eisenhower said that. To be honest, it's true. None of us has a monopoly on truth. I'd like to help forge a new conversation. I'm unabashedly progressive on my issues. There's no doubt about that. But we need to have a new American conversation, not just a new left conversation or a new right conversation. People don't like to feel that you're trying to defeat them, but people like to feel you're trying to inspire them.
I really like that answer, and it's what I was trying to articulate in a fairly recent debate I had with Cenk, because I do think that there are voters. I'm not talking about the Republican establishment or Republicans in positions of power, right? I'm talking about ordinary Americans who tend to lean conservative or vote as Republicans. There are definitely issues we agree with them on. Like there's agreement, especially on bread and butter issues. And so I like her framing because instead of being like hateful or combative toward ordinary Republican voters, she's trying to inspire them with what she has to offer policy-wise. And I think that's a different approach. I think that's an approach that Bernie Sanders used in 2016, and it was successful to some extent. And I like that she wants to move forward with that type of framing and that strategy. We'll see if it works, but yeah, what are your thoughts?
I agree, I was thinking the same thing. Bernie never attacks random conservatives or regular people or whatever, even sometimes when maybe it's merited. So I think that that's a good strategy. I think it's like, obviously she was sort of critiquing Francesca there. I go back and forth. Even Cenk tries to be diplomatic sometimes, and sometimes he's calling them knuckleheads.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, but he gets it. Like I think most people who genuinely care about like moving forward get it. And look, I don't necessarily disagree with what Francesca said there, right? Because it is true. The obsession with doing away with rights for folks. doing away with the right for people to live lives of dignity just because of what their gender identity is, their sexual identity is, like, it's wrong. And I think it's right to call out the Republican Party for that. At the same time, it's also important to like remind them all these scapegoats that your right-wing elites are pointing to for all your issues are actually not the cause of all your issues. This is all distraction. It's meant to instill hatred in your heart. So you're distracted from these Republican lawmakers helping corporations rob you. Like, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's tough.
It's really
but I think
tough.
I think it's a little bit harder for people like us who have to talk for literally hours about a million different things while being constantly attacked by the people that we're trying to appeal to and arouse, by the way. I'm doing the best job I can, America. But I like the strategy. Look, if it was up to me, Biden would announce in a month that he's pulling out. Marianne Williamson would run, a bunch of other people, including a bunch of other progressives would run. They could battle it out. I think that would be awesome. That'd be great for America, and I hope to see it.
So finally, let's talk about how young people feel about Marianne Williamson according to current polling. Now, if you look at the broader population, she has about 5% support in the polls, which politics.
I mean, Bernie was at like 3% months into 2015.
I know, like Cenk gets excited because like she's polling at 5%, and I'm like, okay. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, she could build momentum. That's a good thing. But apparently, no one takes you seriously until you pass that 5% threshold. Which I still don't see like corporate media taking her seriously. The Democratic Party thinks she's like not a big deal. But among young voters, let's talk about that. A recent poll found Marianne Williamson hovering above 20% with voters under 30, far higher than she reached in the crowded 2020 field. So there's that. And she's aware of this phenomenon. During a conversation with Ryan Grimm of The Intercept, she said this: all these people would text me and say, my 17-year-old loves you. My 20 or 22-year-old wants to know if she can have your email. I don't wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, hello, TikTok star.
I do.
Do you?
No.
Okay. But obviously, I'm grateful that there is a platform, that there is a venue where I'm seen and the message is received. And
that's awesome.
And it's true. I mean, if it weren't for TikTok, it's not like she's being taken seriously by traditional media, by legacy media.
Well, they're going to ignore her. A combination of a lot of them probably not thinking that she's going to make much of an impact, and the rest thinking, I don't want her to, so we're just not going to talk about her.
Yeah. Well, we will talk about her, and we'll share her policy proposals with you, because it's important to give every candidate a fair shot. I don't think that we need to automatically support Biden because he's the incumbent, assuming he runs for re-election, which he shouldn't, but nonetheless, he probably will. Yeah. So anyway, we've got a little more time left, about 2 minutes. So I wanted to read a few more comments before we wrap up the main show. Our bonus episode's gonna be fantastic. We're gonna talk about the latest round of Trump NFTs. Yes, while everyone's given up on NFTs and have realized that it's a scam, not Donald Trump, and they've sold out. So we'll talk about them, we'll show them to you. Just excellent artwork. I mean, incomparable. I've never seen anything so wonderful. Huge. We'll also talk about the right-wing reaction to Fox News's settlement with Dominion voting systems. So you've got that to look forward to. tyt.com/join to become a member. All right, let's read some comments here. We've got Sue who writes in and says, I've read your comment already, sorry Sue. Foresto writes in and says, we're not saying we'll do anything bad. We're just protecting you from what we'll do if you don't comply voluntarily. Yeah, that's the story about the elite breeders. R. Stone writes it and says, pretty soon conservatives will eventually fall back to the Jamie and Cersei brand of breeding. They don't want to get rid of child marriage in some of these states. It's dark. It's a Game of Thrones reference about something not good, kind of bad.
Kinda.
Yeah, kind of very bad. Anyway, we've got Jason Ray. Wonder why Congress wants to crack down on TikTok. Yeah,
I think they have plenty of other reasons. I don't think it's specific to Marianne Williamson.
Yeah,
but sure, it is where young people organize.
Exactly. All right, we'll see you in the bonus episode. tyt.com/join.
our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them.